Hello, I'm Dennis Taylor, and welcome to the Opera Den. I'm going to open today's program in an unorthodox manner by showing a video clip from one of my favorite movies, the 1935 classic film A Night at the Opera. This scene takes place on an ocean liner cruising from Italy to America.
Say, I just remembered. I came back here looking for somebody. You don't know who it is, do you?
It's a funny thing. It just slipped my mind.
Oh, I know. The greatest tenor in the world. That's what I'm after.
Why, I'm his manager.
Whose manager?
The greatest tenor in the world.
The fellow that sings at the opera here?
Sure.
What's his name?
What do you care? I can't pronounce it. What do you want with him?
Well, I want to sign him up for the New York Opera Company. You know that America is waiting to hear him sing?
Well, he can sing loud, but he can't sing that loud.
Well, I think I can get America to meet him halfway.
I love that line. Well, he can sing loud, but he can't sing that loud. Today, we will hear from some singers who could sing that loud. I'm going to consider the evolution of demanding roles in opera, as well as some of the singers best suited to those roles. I will feature singers who have large voices, but it's not the sheer volume I'm after. I want singers whose clear, ringing voices generate a kind of visceral excitement. This program will be an informal and very subjective romp through 200 years of performance history. I'm going to start with Rossini's opera, The Barber of Seville, which made its debut in 1816. This is a prime example of an opera from the so-called Bel Canto period. The term Bel Canto literally means beautiful singing in Italian. The three best-known Bel Canto composers were Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti. Many of their compositions have sustained lyrical melodies and are sung with an emphasis on a smooth vocal line. Let's hear a brief example from the first act of The Barber of Seville. This recording is by a very stylish Italian tenor, Luigi Alva. Note the emphasis on phrasing, smooth line, and unforced tone. Well, that was lovely, wasn't it? But in 1831, 15 years after the premiere of The Barber of Seville, a dramatic change took place. A French tenor, Gilbert Louis Dupré, sang a high C not in falsetto or head voice, but from the chest. This way of producing the high C changed the course of performance technique for tenors. The opera in which Dupré sang this high C was Rossini's Guillaume Tell. Here's a portion of an aria sung by modern-day tenor Brian Email, which has the type of ringing high notes that modern audiences have come to expect.
Ami, ami, se connaît vengeance, si notre chef est dans les fers, c'est à nous qu'appartient sa défense. Qu'alors les chemins sont ouverts, qu'alors les chemins sont ouverts. Suivez-moi, suivez-moi, d'un monstre perfide, troppo l'espérance homicide, troppo l'espérance homicide. Arrachant Guillaume à ses coups, arrachant Guillaume à ses coups, troppo l'espérance homicide,
Well, we might think that sounds great, but the composer of that opera, Rossini, was repulsed by the sound of the high C sung in that manner. He said it sounded like a chicken with its throat being cut. But in spite of his objections, the course of history has changed, and things have never been the same since. Dupré had a rival tenor, Adolphe Nourry, who was the principal tenor at the Paris Opera. As Dupré became more popular, Nourry tried to learn the technique, but failed and actually contemplated suicide. In the early decades of the 19th century, the Romantic movement in music, as well as the arts in general, was a major influence in portraying heroic figures. If the character in the opera was a larger-than-life person, then it followed that they should have a voice to match. Grand operas with 5 acts featuring complex plots, a ballet, and singers who could command the stage. Composers such as Meyerbeer, Berlioz, Verdi, and Wagner wrote operas that extended the vocal demands of the singers. Meyerbeer's Robert le Diable had its premiere in 1831. It is considered the first grand opera at the Paris Opera House. The 5-act structure, the ballet, and singing style became the dominant trend in opera for the next few decades. One of the best tenors to ever sing the role of Robert was the French tenor Léonce Antoine Escalaise. His classic training gave him a command of contrasting styles, for not only could he sing brilliant high notes, he could also gracefully execute bel canto trills and runs. We will hear the full extent of his vocal skills in the Sicilienne from Meyerbeer's Robert le Diable in this recording made in 1905.
Allez bien sur la terre, n'est-il donc pas le plaisir, le plaisir, le plaisir, l'œuvre bien, l'œuvre bien, l'œuvre bien.
Meanwhile, in Italy, a young composer named Giuseppe Verdi started to make some waves of his own. After some early successes and overcoming the tragic loss of his wife and children, his third opera, Nabucodonosor, premiered in 1842. The immediate success of this opera launched his career. One of the contributing factors to the success of this opera was the soprano Giuseppina Strepponi, one of the leading lyric sopranos of her era and a favorite singer of Bellini and Donizetti. This role requires a dramatic soprano, such as the Ukrainian-born Maria Gulagina, seen here in a Metropolitan Opera production. The woman who would later become Verdi's wife, Strepponi, symbolizes the difficult transition away from the bel canto style of singing. The extreme vocal demands of her role in Nabucco probably led to the premature end of her singing career. The remainder of this program will feature about a dozen operas in approximate chronological order and how the demands on the singers evolved. Born in 1813, the same year as Verdi, German composer Richard Wagner could not have been more different in his temperament, philosophical outlook, and approach to opera. Whereas Verdi was always the man of the theater who looked for drama with relatable characters, Wagner was taken with mythological stories and legends from the ancient past that tend to have more philosophical meaning. Wagner's opera Tannhäuser premiered in 1845. This opera deals with the conflict between sacred and profane love and the redemptive power of love. The tenor role is very demanding, and I'll talk more about the Wagner tenor in a few minutes. In the opening of Act II, the lead soprano Elizabeth sings an expressive greeting to the great singing hall of the castle. This aria demands a strong voice. American soprano Jessie Norman made her debut in the role of Elizabeth in 1969 in Berlin. 16 years later, in a recital at the English National Opera in London, she sang the aria Die teure Halle with great intensity, as you will see.
Sie jetzt 2000 hoch sich geben
Verdi's Rigoletto debuted in 1851. The title role called for a lyric baritone with a range not far below a tenor, but a warm, solid middle that could shake the rafters. The aria I am about to play is set in the Duke's palace. Rigoletto's daughter has been abducted by several courtiers and given to the Duke. When Rigoletto is denied access to his daughter, he unleashes his fury on them. And what better man to sing this aria than an Italian baritone whose last name literally means big loud. In 1886, a 2-day-old baby was left on the steps of a hospital in Legnano, Italy. Impressed by his large body and strong voice, the nuns named him Apollinare Granforte. He would grow up to be one of the leading Verdi baritones of his era. Here he is singing the opening portion of the aria, Cortigiani vil razza dannata.
Partigiani, vil razza dannata, sapere quale perretto vendette il mio bene. A voi nulla per loro conviene, ma mia figlia impagabil tesor la rendete o se pur disarmata. Questo amore per voi sola cruenta, nulla in terra più l'uomo aventa, e dei figli dipenda l'onor. E la porta, assassini, m'aprite la porta, assassini, m'aprite!
Hector Berlioz's epic opera Les Troyens opened in 1858. It is based on Virgil's Aeneid and is set in the time of the Trojan War. The original opera was so long that the parts were sung on successive nights. The opera was not presented in its entirety until 21 years after the composer's death. It is one of the most ambitious and grandest of all grand operas, with modern performances lasting about 5.5 hours. In Act 5, the hero Aeneas sings of the torment of leading Dido and sailing for Italy. In this excerpt, American tenor Brian Himmel sings this demanding aria. Meanwhile, Verdi was not to be outdone by his French rivals. his sprawling four-act opera La Forza del Destino made its premiere in St. Petersburg, Russia in 1862. This opera contains two magnificent tenor-baritone duets, as well as being a showcase for the soprano. In the final act, Leonora sings the aria, Pace, Pace mio Dio, in which she begs God to just let her die, and finishes the aria by repeating the word maledizione, a curse, 5 times. Leontine Price sings this aria in a 1982 concert performance at the Met. She recorded this numerous times, and while her voice sounded fresher in the 1960s, never did she finish the aria with this kind of fierce determination. Wagner's opera Die Walküre was completed in 1854, but not performed until 1870. One of the most famous sopranos to sing the roles of Sieglinde and later Brunhilde was Norway's Kirsten Flagstad. She was not well known outside of Scandinavia until she made her stunning debut at the Metropolitan Opera on February 2nd, 1935. In a Saturday matinee radio broadcast, Flagstad sang Sieglinde. The radio host, former star of the Met herself, Geraldine Farrar, was so overwhelmed by Flagstad's first act performance that she tossed aside her prepared remarks at the intermission and praised Flagstad as a new star. Just 4 days later, Flagstad sang Isolde, and later that same season sang Brunhilde in both Walküre and Götterdämmerung, Elsa in Lohengrin, and Elizabeth in Tannhäuser. The Met's longtime general manager, Giulio Gatti-Casazza, said, "I have given America 2 great gifts, Caruso and Flagstad." A 1938 film called The Big Broadcast was a variety show performed in front of an audience on a cruise ship. One of the scenes in this film features Miss Flagstad, who will be introduced by a well-known Hollywood star.
Ladies and gentlemen, it isn't often that I have the privilege of introducing such a distinguished artist as Madame Kirsten Flagstad, star of the Metropolitan Opera Company. Madame Flagstad has been acclaimed the world's greatest living soprano. She will sing an aria from Richard Wagner's opera, The Valkyrie, Brunhilde's battle cry. Mr. Wilfred Pelletier of the Metropolitan will conduct.
Harten Sturm sollst du bestehen, Brinker nach eine Frau, im Wagen mit dem Wintergespann. Heiß wie die goldene Geist sie schwingt, die armen Tiere ächzen vor Angst, wild verfassten die Räder, zornig herzig zum Fang. In solchem Strauße streit ich nicht gern, lieb ich auch mutiger Männer Schland. Drum sieh, wie der Sturm du bestehst, ich Lustige lass dich im Stich.
Flagstad teamed up with the great Danish heroic tenor Laurits Melchior for many legendary performances in the 1930s and 40s. Melchior began his singing career as a baritone, but a colleague convinced him that his voice was better suited to the tenor range. So, with financial support from a wealthy patron, Melchior took a couple of years off to make the transition. His voice was a force of nature, and he was widely regarded as the best Wagnerian heroic tenor, certainly of his era, and perhaps the greatest of all time. In the first act of Die Walküre, he demonstrates almost superhuman volume and breath control as Siegmund pleads for the sword his father promised him in his hour of need. Wagner's Tristan und Isolde was a revolutionary opera that premiered in 1865 in Munich. It's almost impossible to overstate the significance of this work and its impact on the future of opera. The title roles are two of the most demanding in all of opera. The first 4 performances of this opera featured a real-life husband and wife team, Ludwig and Malvina Schnorr von Karlsfeld. It is sadly ironic that an opera where both lovers would die would be the last Tristan that either of the von Karlsfelds would sing. Ludwig died 6 weeks after the premiere at the young age of 29. His widow fell into a deep depression and never sang again. In the 1930s, Melchior and Flagstad were in great demand, performing this work at leading opera houses around the world. I will play an excerpt from the Love Duet, but first want to share a humorous anecdote about this scene, which goes on for over 20 minutes. The famous Italian conductor Arturo Toscanini said that if the 2 lovers were Italians, they would already have had 7 children. But since they're Germans, they're still just talking it over. Here's a brief excerpt of the Act II Love Duet as performed by the eminent pair Melchior and Flagstad in a 1939 studio recording. Verdi's penultimate opera, Otello, made its premiere in 1887. The opera opens with what is probably the most difficult challenge for any singer to begin an opera. It takes a dramatic tenor with a stentorian voice to pull off this entrance. One of the best to ever sing this role was the Italian Mario Delmonico, who sang the role of Otello over 200 times. This film version from the 1950s is one of the finest of this challenging piece. Massenet's opera Esclarmonde is based on a medieval tale of chivalry. This work has gorgeous melodies and lush orchestration, which was heavily influenced by Wagner. Some of the writing for soprano was inspired by a chance encounter between the composer and the American singer Sybil Sanderson, who sang at its premiere in 1889. The role of Esclarmonde is very difficult, and the opera was rescued from obscurity in the 1970s by performances starring Joan Sutherland. This brief excerpt will give you a hint as to why it is seldom performed. Around 1890, the Verismo movement in opera emerged as a reaction to grand operas about royalty and larger-than-life mythical beings. The trend in opera grew out of the Verismo literary movement that writing should depict people objectively, representing common, everyday people. The first notable Verismo operas were Mascagni's Cavalleria Rusticana and Leoncavallo's Pagliacci. The tenor roles, especially in these operas, called for a passionate declamatory style of singing actor. One of the best-known arias is Vesti la Giuba from Pagliacci. The clown Canio puts on his makeup and says he must make people laugh, even though his heart is breaking. Here is Mario Delmonico in a live performance.
Travolta innanzi la spasmo il pianto in una samara che al singhiozzo al dolore arridi aiuccio al favore in affronto. Oh
like to think of the previous selections as being the opening rounds of a heavyweight fight. Now let's clear the ring for our last two combatants, and I use the word advisedly. You'll see what I mean in a few minutes. Tenor Franco Corelli had one of the finest tenor voices of all time. A very handsome man, blessed with a glorious voice, he appeared to have the whole package. But he was anxious about performing and very insecure when his stage partners got more applause or held on to their high notes longer. Audiences, though, went wild for his exciting voice. In 1967, Corelli sang Tosca in Parma, Italy. In this second act scene, Cavaradossi has just been brought up from the dungeon where he was tortured. The dialogue makes clear that Napoleon has just won a military victory, which inspires the tenor to exclaim, "Vittoria, Vittoria."
Nel pozzo del Cardino, oh, spoletta! Mai gradito! E spezza quali come le potete lo definito, un messaggio di sconfitta e sconfitta come dove, a vedere questo, alla parte vincitore, oh, che la sentura!
Swedish dramatic soprano Birgit Nilsson had a bright, gleaming voice. She specialized in Wagner roles as well as some Strauss operas and Puccini's Turandot. Nilsson had an international career and made some legendary recordings, most notably as Brunhilde in the Schulte Ring Cycle. This milestone recording is a marvel of sound engineering, a tribute to recording engineer John Colshaw, as well as the excellent cast. An excerpt from Brunhilde's Farewell will give you a sample of the clarity and strength of her voice. In the 1960s, one of the hottest tickets in New York was for Corelli and Nilsson in Puccini's Turandot. In Nilsson's memoirs, she said the performances had the excitement of a bullfight except you never knew who would win. Meaning, would Corelli or Nielsen hold their high C the longest in their Act II duet? Let's hear an excerpt of the duet in question. This is from a 1970 performance in Italy. By the time of that performance, they had been singing Turandot together for 10 years and had more or less come to an agreement on how long to hold the high notes. But things didn't start out that way. When the Metropolitan Opera was on its spring tour in Boston in 1961, there was an incident where Nielsen was determined to win and held her high C until she almost passed out, while Corelli, not anticipating this, ran out of breath. He was so mad that he walked off the stage and back to his dressing room. What followed is best described by Rudolf Bing in his memoirs. I was not in the hall. An emissary came to me in the lobby and said, "Mr. Bing, we are losing our tenor." I went backstage, and even before I neared Corelli's door, I heard him screaming, his wife screaming, their dog barking. He had slammed his hand on the dressing table and picked up a minuscule splinter. There was a drop of blood on the table, and his wife was calling for an ambulance. I calmed them down as much as I could and suggested to Corelli that in the love scene in the next act, he could get even with Miss Nielsen by biting her ear. That cheered him up a great deal. In fact, he liked the idea so much that he told Miss Nielsen about it, which gave him all the satisfaction of actually biting her without doing it, thank God. Birgit Nielsen's memoirs confirm the details of this incident, and she adds these further comments. Corelli's mood improved immediately at the very thought of planting an unforgettable kiss upon me. In the last moment, however, he lost his nerve and neither kissed nor bit. Bing had discreetly left the opera house, fearing the outcome of this plot. When I learned of Bing's attempt to pull off this coup against me, I sent the general manager the following telegram. Must cancel next performance. Stop. Serious bite injury. Stop. Birgit. I don't know how I can possibly top that, but I'll try. I'm going to conclude today's program with this video clip featuring Joan Sutherland.